For the hobbyist woodworker, there's probably only two universal constants. We all want more space and we all want more clamps. Can't really help you with more space, but in this episode, we're going to look at making our own clamps.
The Wood Night is sponsored by I Would Like.
So this is a prototype clamp, and as you can see, it's a parallel type clamp. It's primarily made of all hardwood, so the four main pieces are hardwood, and we've got two gussets on either side of the moving jaw that are out of 6mm plywood. The jaws are lined with HDPE, in this case chopping board material, and that gives us a non-stick surface that shouldn't mar your wood but also won't glue itself to the wood. The bar is made out of 32 by 10 flat bar steel. There are some pressure plates in here which are made out of 25 by, I think it's 5, might be 3mm flat bar. We've got a threaded rod here which is actually a trapezoidal thread, so this is the metric equivalent of Acme thread, and well, in this case it's just a plywood handle, but any sort of handle will do. If you look in the description below, you'll be able to see links to plans for these clamps, as well as where I bought all of the stuff to make these clamps, though obviously if you're international, that is outside of Australia, it's probably going to be of less use for you. However, the general principles will still apply.
As per usual, I started off dimensioning my stock to be square at four sides. Strictly speaking, it really only needs two flat faces, but it's much easier if everything is square. I marked out a set of mortises for the clamp components according to the planned dimensions. There are three methods of making the mortises covered in this video. First, and probably the easiest, is to use a drill bit to hole out the majority of the material. Since our bar stock is 10mm wide, the best option is to use a 10mm Forstner or breadpoint bit. Once that's all drilled out, the mortise needs to be squared up and cleaned, so mark everything out with a marking knife and chisel away. Go about halfway from one side, then flip and try to avoid chip out. Once that's done, the mortise can be smoothed out with a sanding file and regular flat files. Second method is way quicker, but it does rely on having a fair steel domino. Using the 10mm cutter set to the loosest setting, it makes pretty quick work of the mortises. If you've got the DF 500 like I do, you probably need to flip it to get through the thick stock. Once again, it needs to be cleaned up with chisels, but it's really just squaring the corners. The third method is by dadoing two halves and gluing together. This allows you to use much thinner stock, which is great for using up offcuts. Once the relevant part is cut to length, setting up two stop blocks on the crosscut sled makes it really easy to nibble away. I used a 12mm Dado stack. No cleanup is needed here, but it's important to glue the two halves straight and parallel, so it's best to clamp it around the bar stock. It should be able to easily slide off once clamped up. The tilting jaw component receives a threaded hole for the handle. Since I'm using 12mm trapezoidal thread, this needs to be a 9mm hole. With a bit of wax on the tap, I could slowly run the tap through the part using my drill. These wooden threads hold up super well and have amazing clamping force. For the handle, drill a 12 to 13mm hole using a Forstner or breadpoint bit. The best option for this would be to use a pen blank vise, but a simple hand screw vise works pretty well too. I knocked off the corner to create an octagonal handle. This is much more comfortable in hand, and unlike a fully rounded handle, is much more gripping power. The trapezoidal thread can then be glued into the handle with epoxy. Plywood gussets that join the parts of the movable jaw need a rebate to sit into. This is best done in 2 passes, so it's a good opportunity to batch out a lot at once before adjusting the router position. The gussets are cut from 6mm plywood using the template provided in the plans. I opted to make my template out of MDF so that I could come back and flush trim it with a router bit. The steel locking and pressure plates just require some through holes for screws. Assembly is pretty straightforward. Pressure plate screws onto the underside of the larger portion of the moving head. Then the moving head can be glued up on the bar to ensure it's straight and parallel with the lower portion. I shot a few brads after lining it up so I could slide it off and add more clamps. The locking plate is screwed onto the underside of the tilting jaw, testing to make sure it engages when tilting but not when straight. The fixed head can be glued on with epoxy. For this version I had pre-drilled some nails to act as pins, but that knocked my alignment out. Probably just glue it on with epoxy, get it straight, then when it's cured come back and drill and possibly tap for a pin to add strength.
I've made a few alterations off camera. This is the second clamp. The first one I'd slightly skewed the fixed head when I actually drilled the hole. So I've avoided drilling the holes this time around. I'll come back and drill probably 1/4 inch because I've got a bunch of 1/4 inch bolts to use up. And the result is that this is much more parallel with the sliding body. The other one had a slight skew to it, which look, I can fix up with a hand plane probably, but I'll get to that another time. But the big question is, does it actually clamp? So nice and tight all the way along the jaws. And I am not able to move that. Actually, before I hit that, I'll draw a line so we know how far it is or is not moving. So with some serious force there, we are able to actually move that. So this clamp also, I think, costs $15 or at least $10. So let's see how that goes. So comparing a commercial F-clamp and my parallel clamp, they're about even. If anything, slightly more force was needed on my clamp to actually move the two pieces. This was $16, it works out, $16 Australian to build one of these. And if you forego the trapezoidal thread and get all thread instead, you can probably get that down to about $10. As I mentioned, there are plans available, something like 18 pages long at this stage. I will certainly be making a lot more of these clamps. I've mentioned past a lot of the F-clamps that I have are starting to fail. These cheap ones from Aldi, a lot of their heads have coming off, so I've had to drill in and put in a nail, and there's so much slop in these. They're really unpleasant to use. Thankfully, I haven't had any one of them fall apart on an actual glue up, but I am starting to get a nice collection of random clamp heads that have just fallen off from the bodies when I've put them back up on the rack. This video is long enough as it is, so I'll be doing further discussion over on my second channel, my vlog channel. There's a link in the description below. Plans are available, again, description below in the website article. And if you are a Patreon supporter, head over to there and you'll find a discount code for the plans. Thanks for watching.